Hello students, today we are going to discuss the factors responsible for the growth of communalism in India. This unit would enable the students to understand the meaning of communalism, the various factors responsible for the growth of communalism in the country, the Indian variant of secularism and the problem of communalism. To begin with, the Indian social reality is confronted with new set of problems and challenges by the changes in the socio-economic formations and development in politics, culture and religion. The complex processes once witnessed in Western Europe as well as Central and Eastern Europe do not seem to be operating in post-colonial countries with any amount of uniformity. Neither their forms nor manifestations, nor the casual links between the free markets, private property, role of peasantry and industrial elites are similar. The specificity of social institutions like the caste system, the religious practices and beliefs, tribal social formations and gender relations provide sufficient condition for the tenacity of the phenomena of opposing forms and practices in India. There have been serious attempts to analyze these formations or trends in India with the help of Asiatic and Oriental formations. One such phenomena is that of communalism. Social science literature in global context attributes a positive meaning to the term communal. In India, this term has been used to denote a negative phenomena. As such, a communalism has been defined in relation to community, which means a common identity accompanied by common culture, history, interest and have characteristics have been the basis in religion. Many arguments have been put forth on communalism, some seeking its indigenous roots in conflicting 18th century activities of the Hindus and the Muslims, which later turned into nationalism. It is also seen in protest traditions in each religious community. The majority of scholars think that it has been a political tool in the colonial context, that is, the politicization of primordial religious identities. Colonial codification of religious laws of different communities helped reify and essentialize communities as tolerant, martial and otherwise. This transformed the Indian population into a universe defined primarily in terms of religion and caste. Consequently, a new colonial historiography evolved, suggesting that Muslims and Hindus have been challenging each other ever since. Such an understanding of Indian history figured prominently in James Mill's effort, in which he divided the Indian history into Hindu, Muslim and the British periods. In constructing this communalist master narrative, local myths and oral traditions were often unofficially reproduced as historiographies in the gazetteers, which again became the basis for further history writing. This process went hand in hand with the production of powerful typecast such as the bigoted Julaha, the fierce Pathan, the intriguing Brahmins, etc. Since these characters became transpersonal and transindividual, timeless and spaceless, they suggested a primordial spirit attached to specific caste or religious groups feeding into communalism. Thus, communalism was seen as an expression of caste as the well-defining culture of India. Thus, the split into two major religious groups can be traced back to the colonial times, when religion came to be considered as the only obligatory identity. Religion would outweigh variables of composite variety such as society, gender, culture, economy and politics. As such, communalism had their specific history and culture excluding and contesting each other. Seen from this angle, communalism is a strategic classification to make sense of the Indian others difference. When this colonial historiography began to be contested by local historiography, Hindus and Muslims had already been constructed into two different religious groups. Division developed further in the 1920s and in the 1930s in the Minority Report in the 1924 and culminated in the Nehru Report of 1928, which stated, "Communal problem of India is primarily a Hindu-Muslim problem." Now we come to the understanding of the meaning of communalism in India. An attempt to analyze the phenomena of communalism has introduced certain distortions. The erroneous conception of community as a religious caste or other ascriptive group focused thinking and research on incorrect lines. The other trend has been to understand communalism in relation to competing religious group identities. In this, communalism is believed and propagated that the social, economic and political interest of one religious, caste and ascriptive groups are dissimilar, divergent and antagonistic to those of others. Communalism highlights only those aspects of religion which are antagonistic rather than those that are humanist, universal and syncretic in nature. In this sense, religion only is an instrumental cause of the growth of communalism. Communalism has emerged as a major obstacle to the building of a modern, progressive nation state and a secular democratic society. Communalism implies the negation and non-recognition of the logic of growing interdependence. To that extent, it is reactionary phenomena. Minority communities breeds a sense of insecurity and fear which is destructive of the self-confidence of the minorities themselves. If not controlled, we can see the consequences of unbridled communalism in multi-religious society, for example, Lebanon. But what is more is that unchecked communalism can lead to the brutalization of societies. The fear of disintegration often leads to situations where people are willing to tolerate suppression of civil liberties and normal judicial processes. Therefore, in the long run, uncontrolled communalism can lead to the death of democratic institutions themselves. Minority communalism, it is obvious today that it is fanning majority communalism. Communalism is not simply the mindfulness of religious identity. It can be described as a religion-based movement which makes a political claim for recognition as a distinctive and separate identity in one form or another in the state. The type of political claims that communal movements make, of course, varies from one region to another, from one country to another, depending upon the geographical factors and the concentration of population. Where minority populations tends to be concentrated, it is natural that in due course of time, these communal demands would take the territorial dimension. From various shades of autonomy to the extreme form of secessionism. This is the route in which these demands ultimately flow. On the other hand, if you have a situation where minority communities is dispersed and does not constitute a major concentration of population, its search and its desire to preserve its identity takes different forms. Therefore, communal movements need not take a uniform or single path to express their fear of loss of identity or to get their imaginary or real grievances remedied. Communalism has emerged as a major obstacle in this sense so far as the Indian democratic process is concerned. According to Professor Manmohan Singh, communalism implies negation and non-recognition of the logic of growing interdependence, and to that extent it is a reactionary phenomenon. The observation makes it necessary to examine the basis of the relationship between communalism as an ideology and the objective reality in the prevalent situation. In fact, according to Bipan Chandra, it creates a great deal of difficulty in the prevailing situation to understand communalism and analyze it. As Chandra writes, communalism was not a spatial or sectional view of the social reality. It was, and it's wrong and unscientific view also. Communalism was not narrow or false because it represents only one community, but because it does not do either. The communalist not only failed to represent national interest, he did not represent even the interest of his own community. Professor Asghar Ali Engineer described communalism as a modern phenomenon. According to him, religion is only the instrumental cause of it. Politics is the fundamental cause, or even socio-economic and political factors are the fundamental causes of communalism. In this regard, a distinction must be made between religious consciousness and communal consciousness. There are two key different things. It is not that one who had religious consciousness will have communal consciousness or vice versa. There are various shades of it in all of us on a conceptual plane. It is very necessary to distinguish between religious consciousness and communal consciousness in a person. In the medieval period, the predominant consciousness was of religious consciousness and not communal consciousness. Communal consciousness is a modern phenomenon which began with the introduction of the British rule in the country. Structural changes took place in our socio-political system with the introduction of the British rule. There have been theorists who ascribe communalism to the colonial form of economy because full capitalist development is not allowed by colonial masters and slow development results in fighting for crumbs, and that gives birth to communalism. However, it is gross simplification to attribute communalism to colonialism or one single cause. Of course, the colonial economy did play a very vital role in promoting communalism and in giving birth to communalism. But to maintain that it is the only cause would be rather an oversimplification. Now we come to the various factors that are essentially responsible for the growth of communalism in the country. Several factors may be attributed to the cause and growth of communalism in India. Some scholars attribute this cause due to the stagnation of the economy during the British rule. The stagnant economy may have affected the aspirations and economic prosperity of certain sections within society. The section of society usually termed as middle class used communalism as a weapon for their own survival at the cost of other classes in the society. Subsequently, other leaders from the community and political parties joined to fuel the tension of communalism in India. This may be well illustrated with the emergence of modern politics with its root in the partition of Bengal in 1905 and the feature of separate electorate under Government of India Act 1909. Later, British government also appeased various communities through communal award in 1932, which witnessed strong resistance from Gandhi and others. All these acts were done by the British government to appease various communities, including the Muslims and the Hindus and other various sections of the society, for their own political needs. Since then, the feeling of communalism has deepened and has become the cause of hatred and unrest, fragmentation in the Indian society. One of the major causes of communalism is the colonial legacy. To trace the factors responsible for the growth of communalism, it is important to understand India's colonial legacy. When the European powers started coming to India in the late 15th century, India was inhabited by different faith and sects, including followers of Sanatana Dharma, Jainism, Buddhism, followers of Vedic order, Muslims, Christians, Jews, and followers of different tribal and regional cult-based and local and family traditions. Everyone was welcome, and there was no record to suggest that the faith of an individual was ever a reason for hatred or dislike. India became an important colony, supplying raw materials as well as cheap labor for the expansion of colonialism in the world, and also became a huge market for the finished goods. The British East India Company set its feet in India during the golden days of Mughal rule. Gradually, the East India Company realized that the mighty Mughal Empire was doomed and smelled a future for itself in the political space due to the internal battle among different powers for supremacy. The 18th century hastened the decline of the Mughal Empire, and its prestige and power were lost owing to the War of Succession among different Mughal princes, where the regional powers became an active participant. The British East India Company grabbed the opportunity with both hands and became an active participant in the power struggle taking place, supporting one section against the other and enriching itself with greater share of political power. The relation between the Hindus and the Muslims started to deteriorate with the coming of the English and worsened as they fought to seize power and become masters of India. In this pursuit, they came across the unique opportunity of playing the one community against another, which has been classically described as the policy of divide and rule. The British used the policy of divide and rule to weaken the nationalist aspiration by creating a cleavage between the Hindus and the Muslims, favoring one community against the other in terms of services and opportunities. It resulted in communal tension between the two groups, and therefore it is considered that the Hindu-Muslim disunity took shape during the continuation of British rule in India. Another factor responsible for communal growth is the misrepresentation of Indian history. The English presented a distorted version of Indian history and came up with a communal division of the historical period. Ancient was declared Hindu India, ignoring Buddhist, Jain and several other groups. Medieval was declared Muslim India, ignoring the role of Bhakti and Sufi traditions and the power struggle between the Afghans and Turks. History teaching and theories of division were meticulously developed and passed on to people so that they become aware of our heroes, and stories related to their valor were circulated through textbooks. James Mill's division of Indian history into three phases, ancient, medieval and modern, became a framework for communalists from which they could construct their past and their present identities. Therefore, according to Romila Thapar, idea of the glorious past and the separateness of communities emanates from such construction. During the national movement, a strong Hindu religious element was introduced in the nationalist thought. The Orientalist writings, which glorified the Hindu religion and the period in history, became the basis for the propagation of rationalist ideas and pride for the motherland. In this process, the Muslims were seen as alien. Another factor responsible for the growth of communalism is the economic context of the country. Economic underdevelopment and scarcity can be considered to be one of the most significant cause of the growth of communalism in India. Underdevelopment of the economy leads to uneven development across communities. In the struggle over scarce resources, the middle classes of the community perceive themselves to be in stiff competition with their counterparts. In this context, the middle class elites of the community strengthens their demand by mobilizing the support of the masses of the community. To achieve this end, they formulate their grievances in terms of the ethos of the community and raise a few religious demands in order to appease the poor masses of the community. In this way, the economic rivalry between the petty bourgeois elite of two communities assumes a religious and communal basis. The explanation is applicable to the situations of the Muslims in the pre-partition period, which witnessed increasing competition among the urban middle classes in a condition of colonial stagnation for government jobs, educational placings, political positions in the legislative councils and municipal bodies. Political organizations like the RSS and Hindu Mahasabha, as well as the Muslim leagues, were also based on predominantly communal identity. The assertion of Sikh communal identity in independent India can also be understood in the context of the Green Revolution that brought enormous wealth to the agrarian bourgeois in Punjab countryside and led to direct confrontation with Hindu industrial bourgeois of the state. According to Achin Vanayak, the most important cause for the rise of Hindu fundamentalism after independence has been the intermediate caste, whose cultural expression of a force which had enhanced its authority and its upward mobility on economic and political fronts. Now we come to the important point where it is seen that the problem of communalism in India is often stoked by the meaning or the way secularism is defined in our constitution. According to Partha Chatterjee, secularism is preached and practiced in India has its own way stoked the fire of communalism in the country. Secularism, as enumerated in the constitution, has an Indian character. The Indianness consists in the fact that the Indian state has been allowed to intervene in religious matters of all communities in order to achieve the modernist purpose of socio-religious reform. Chatterjee argues that there are a very real possibility of a Hindu right locating itself quite firmly within the domain of the modernizing state and using the arguments for interventionist secularism to promote intolerance and violence against minorities. Indian secularism has made room for and it's compatible with the idea of state-sponsored religious reforms, which has been considered to be the most important problem with Indian secularism. With this, we come to the conclusion of our discussion. The issue of communalism in India can be understood as a problem of community relation between the majority Hindus and the minority Muslims. The division of the country on communal lines, the seething bitterness triggered by the partition that caused thousands to perish and thousands more became homeless, still continues to loom large in the psyche of both the communities. Any understanding of communalism in India needs to take these historical factors into consideration, because communalism in India is socially nurtured and politically manipulated. Communalism thrives in India in the context of religio-cultural plurality on the one hand and uneven and distorted economic development on the other. Thank you.